Hi everyone, it's great to be here. This is an important subject. I was really appreciative of what was presented before. I think it's a good introduction, what I hope I can convey to you now. We're going to speak about, in general, the disruptive technology that we need for the exponential type of climate action that we need as well. So we're going to focus from the different SDGs into one, that is SDG 13, climate. And I've chosen to give you a bit of a deeper insight in the field of energy, so we can discuss some of the self-organizing, bottom-up, fair share type of issues, very specifically on an energy use case that we're having. So I hope it's okay with you, and a quick introduction to what Stefan said. It was mostly correct, with one big difference. I run since 11 years the not-for-profit BETH19 Foundation. So this is not a company, this is a foundation. I started this foundation after a career in business. I'm an economist. I started with McKinsey. I went from Germany to China, set up the first software joint venture in Vietnam, then worked with the Abu Dhabi government for a while, and decided to come back to Switzerland to basically move something to sustainability. And the way I did that was to set up Swiss Cleantech. So Swiss Cleantech is the first green business association in Switzerland. And the theory of change is very easy. If you wanted to move on sustainability like energy, you had to, in a democracy like Switzerland, bring these things through parliament. That means you need to get majority, or sometimes even through the people. And in most parliaments the world over, you have the left and the green guys, generally they think sustainability is important. But the right guys and the business community is still not so sure. So when it comes to the specific business issues, you would have sort of the middle parties becoming extremely important, because they would listen to what business says, and then if you have them, you can get majority. If you don't, you lose. And that's the theory of change in Swiss Cleantech. So we set up this organization with businesses being pro-sustainability, so we can convince the middle parties to say yes to sustainability, and therefore win basically at the ballot or in parliament. I did this for 7 years. And it was quite relevant when it comes to Switzerland's energy change movement. I then decided after the COP21 climate conference in Paris in December 2015 that it was enough of the Switzerland focus for me, because I did have an international career and I wanted to explore some subjects internationally. And I basically do that today in 4 main projects. The first one is CAP. We can't really talk about today. It has to do with advocacy as well, linking global firms with local policy decisions. If anybody's interested in advocacy, come talk to me. Not many people are, but it's an important subject, so that's CAP. The second one Stefan mentioned, the second one is climate dividend. This is a policy tool that is basically a smart way of pricing carbon or pricing emissions. It makes a tax, but then does not keep that money as the government, but redistributes that tax to all the different households in the economy, and thereby has very interesting aspects that other type of tools in this direction don't. If you think of the yellow vest crisis in France right now, where Macron actually wants to do a good thing, as Dirk suggested, we need prices on externalities. Macron said, okay, let's put a price on emissions on fuels. Problem is, if you do that, the first ones you hit are the workers, and they're not thinking about the end of the world, they're thinking of the end of the month. So they say, hey guy, we don't really want to pay for climate change issues, us, which are, the poor ones. We saw income and wealth distribution issues mentioned, so we need to think about the right tools for what you call just transition, and so climate dividend is one of the things that we work in this area. And then we have 2 subjects that are innovation focused. The one is climate ledger initiative that Stefan mentioned. I was one of the first guys to talk to the UN about blockchain. In Paris, I noted that nobody was really aware of this technology, and still they were negotiating between multiple parties. They didn't trust each other. There were different rules and standards and stuff. So I kind of smelled potential for blockchain, but nobody was speaking about it. So I started many workshops and many sort of capacity building things, just to push this subject into the UN and also to some extent into the World Bank. And so this started 2015 and went on 2016 and 17, and in 2017 we added an initiative that's Hack4Climate. That's this innovation program. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So that's what I did, and that's what I'm doing still today. So that's the what, now the why. why am I doing this? Because there's certainly ways to make more money and work less, I can tell you that. But my motivation is climate. And we have many SDGs. I do think number 13, climate, is an extremely important one. The reason is simple. We've been sleeping around for such a long time. We've been enjoying so much growth that we've burned so much carbon that we now have very, very little time to basically avoid catastrophic type changes. And I'm not the green lefty type of person, and if I speak about catastrophic type changes, I really don't want to sound idealistic or weird in any way. But if you look at the charts, unfortunately, that's really what we're kind of facing. So here's on the left, IPCC. They have released what you call the SR, the Special Report on 1.5C, end of last year. And the message is very clear. We have now 30 years, 30, it's not much, to go from where we are today to net zero by about 2050. So if you take out one thing from my speech on climate, please remember this. Somebody asks you, so what exactly do we have to do in climate? Easy. We're now on top of our emissions globally. We have never emitted so much greenhouse gases into the atmosphere as just last year, 2018. That was the horrible news everybody received at COP and a little bit before. That actually emissions went up again. But this is the wrong direction because we have 30 years from now to 2050 to bring it down to zero. And if we want to do that, this is revolution. This is not, let's do a little bit here, a little bit there, next week, next month. But this is going full speed into changing an economy that is today fossil fuel based into something that cannot, on a net basis, emit any greenhouse gases anymore. Otherwise, we're entering so much costs and so much risks globally that we really have a big problem. So the logic is quite simple. If we have these 30 years, we need to leverage technology in order to achieve this type of exponential development that we depend on. And when we think of that, we look at what we call the fourth industrial revolution. This is sort of a World Economic Forum-based aspect. We say we have the first, the second, the third revolution, you know what they were. And now we have these cyber-physical systems where IoT comes in, and we have automated things, we have AI, to accelerate. And we need to use this power. But I want to make it very clear that I'm deeply convinced that this type of development cannot be just done by technology applied to technological innovation. We have to also look at regulatory innovation, new ways to regulate things. We need that because of the new technology. We think of IP rights, data privacy, all types of things that need to be adapted to a sort of more modern tech-based society. But we also need just to simply internalize some of those externalities. So for example, give CO2 emissions a price. Because this type of exponential innovation needs to be directed. It cannot just go anywhere. Theoretically, you could use AI to be really mean on forests or fish and basically monitor with high-res sat from the sky every single fish in the sea, send out those robots to kill the last one, and high tech, great. But completely in the wrong direction. So we need to kind of have these two in sync and aligned, and that's what we're looking at. So here's the World Economic Forum. They have some interactive thing on the fourth industrial revolution. It's quite interesting. It has these main themes and then these different other themes that are affected. And we are picking out 3 technologies we focus on for this type of exponential innovation that we're looking for. And this is a simplification for all the techies around here. But when we speak to UN guys and economists and those type of people above 50, you need to simplify, otherwise you lose them. So 3 things: Internet of Things, IoT, distributed ledgers or blockchain, and AI. These 3, we think, are really interesting. There are many other related fields, and of course these things, as the BETH also shows, are very relevant for innovation, of course, very relevant for sustainable development. There's another trend that we see as a macro trend and therefore want to incorporate when we think about innovation. And that's the trend of things, of systems, going generally the world over from central to decentral. The one I'm going to show you today in more detail, energy, makes this bluntly clear. We used to have big power plants, networks, and then people sucking energy from these networks. This turns around now, where we have different distributed sources, and basically a system starting to work bottom up rather than top down. But there's many different other examples, as Dirk mentioned before. So if you think about mobility, we're also moving in a decentral way. It's just like the distributed notion of ownership. In my generation, we used to all want to own a car. I hope you don't anymore. You think it's more important that you can co-own a car and use it when you actually use it, and not put it in the garage as Dirk said we shouldn't. So we have mobility, distributed ownership. We have land, new ways of tokenizing land where you distribute ownership to a wide range of people. We have markets and currencies, of course. So the point here is, if you look at the world in our opinion, you'll find that we have very many tendencies to go decentral because technology enables us to do that. And that in most instances, this is a good thing. It allows us to create systems that are more fair among the different agents, but also systems that are more sustainable. They're fair to the planet. We can more easily integrate those externalities into these systems. So this is sort of another trend. And if we go now, zoom into the three that we're focusing on, three technologies that we're focusing on, let me try to put those three a little bit in perspective for you, because I think that could be interesting when you think about innovation, when you think about systemic type changes that could happen. So our goal is exponential innovation, in our case, because of climate. We choose those three technologies because we think there's going to be a revolution. We already see and think you know that there's this revolution of the Internet of Things. So we'll have more devices communicating more things, which we need to capture, right? When we capture this information, though, it's extremely important, as Dirk mentioned, that we do this in a distributed way, and we don't have a Google of the Internet of Things. Why is that important? Because that would even accelerate the concentration of power that these central organizations that we have today have, and that results in not very fair systems, and not very efficient systems, for that matter. So, when we capture a lot of new stuff from distributed sources, we need a way to, in a distributed way, administer these and exchange values on these. And that's where distributed ledgers come in. By the way, I always mention distributed ledgers and not blockchain, simply because there are other forms of distributed ledgers than blockchain, and some of them may have advantages if you think of DAX and things like that, but it doesn't really matter so much. We have to keep energy and efficiency and fairness and so on and so forth in mind when we choose the right system, but it doesn't really matter so much. The point is, it needs to be distributed, the ledger. And then, of course, there's AI. And in AI, we have a very similar scenario from the IoT. It's just the other way around. So if, again, we would have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 companies collecting all the data and then able to learn from all of this data, then again, this would lead to an enormous concentration of power. Because AI is power. If you can learn from data, you know more than your peers. And if you're in a monopoly or oligopoly type situation here, that's no good. So again, we want to have a way to, in a distributed way, analyze and learn from data. And then again, back distribute the rewards of what we learn from data to the different stakeholders and not just to a few single ones. And now this arrow below, so of course, if you have a smart AI working, you can start then letting it run the IoT devices directly, so it's not you switching on the heat pump on or off, or it's just not just a stupid timer every morning at 9 it turns on and at 10 it turns off again. No, it's a dynamic system that is run by what you learn in AI and then fed back into IoT, so you start to create automated new type of ecosystems where you have these smart contracts and oracles and what have you that come into play there. For those of you who are interested, I'll share this presentation. There's a white paper we've written, 10 pages. You probably think it's very sort of shallow if you're a techie, but you know, it's as shallow as we think our stakeholders can swallow and understand. So that's our white paper if you're interested. Okay, now we've heard that we cannot just go to LinkedIn, choose 5 guys and say, hey, let's innovate for climate in a disruptive way, but we need to go broader. And Dirk showed this beautiful map before of the world and the vision to source talent from all over the world, and that was really the initial thought of Hack4Climate. So I knew there was potential in these three technologies for climate action. So I wanted to, besides the government initiative that I mentioned, Climate Ledger, I wanted to set up a privately funded innovation activity, and that's Hack4Climate. So Hack4Climate fundamentally is an innovation program. And we do that, we innovate by having basically a three-stage process, a challenge definition, and then a large hackathon, and then an accelerator after the hackathon. We did 17 workshops around the world in 2017 to speak to techies about climate. And then we made an online application to get the best from around the world to participate in a hackathon. We've chosen 100 of the top developers and invited them to Bonn in Germany, rented a hotel boat, had everybody there, we had 33 countries represented, and then for 5 days we hacked on these type of problems. We did it at the climate conference because, as I mentioned at the beginning, especially when you go into areas like climate, you have the tech side, but you also have the regulatory side. That's very important. And you somehow need to find a way to bring the two together. Because if you do very cool tech, but you can't really implement it because the regulation isn't there, there's no innovation. You can't bring it to the ground. So these two need to be together, and therefore that's the main reason why we organized it there. It was going quite well. We had good partners. We presented at the end inside the COP, so we had also a big effect of creating awareness of this technology in the COP climate conferences. We did the same thing just a few months ago in Katowice, where COP24 happened. We had only 25 hackers locally and have tested online formats. We had 70 guys online from Yale and from Myanmar and from Brazil, and we tried to hack online with mixed results, if I'm honest. But yeah, this is Hack4Climate. And we're now building this into an innovation program, as I mentioned, with a 5-year span. So this year is our first year, and for 5 years we're going to be running this program, hackathon, at each of the climate conferences, challenge areas, challenge definition before, accelerator after. So if any of you want to participate, go to hack4climate.org and see what this is all about. Okay, now this is the format of Hack4Climate. In which areas do we innovate? I said our objective is climate. So we are specifying 6 what we call industry themes, where we define these are the challenge areas we want to see activity in. And we work with partners like the WWF or Future Earth or the Stockholm Resilience Institute that help us define these areas. These are the areas where we think technology can bring us forward, and these are the areas where there is room to bring us forward a lot. So for example, energy is between 25 and 40% of the climate problem. So we need to address energy very specifically. We are not interested in wholesale renewable energy trading that, maybe a blockchain application or maybe an interesting application anyway, but we say this is temporary. We think the world will be driven by distributed renewables, and therefore we're interested in distributed renewable energy solutions, not wholesale trading, but actually systems that can run energy systems bottom up. Okay, so these are our areas. I'll go into energy in a second, but like you see, the way we specify, we have these cross-industry themes that we then have parallel to the industry areas, where we say, for example, okay, if you think about land use innovation, so whether something is forest or not forest, or whether something is sustainable agriculture or not sustainable agriculture, you need to think of double macro trends, etc. But for example, remote sensing. With more and more data coming from the sky, we can automate the analysis of land use from the sky in a level of detail we can never do before. In fact, 2017, the Hack4Climate team that has won was actually doing a land use case called Game Forest. And next week I'm in Chile, in Santiago, where we implement our first pilot based on this. It's basically applying AI on past satellite pictures of forests, and then develop a neural network to recognize the patterns so that you can, into the future, predict where deforestation is most likely to happen. We can do this now with relatively low resolution images to say whether something is forest or not. The higher the resolution of the images, And the more frequent the flyovers of the satellites, the more we can go into detail and say, for example, which crop type we're talking about. Or we can say whether a farmer is employing a sustainable or a non-sustainable agricultural practice. If you then match this to mobile phones, of course, you can start doing alert systems, and you can send, for example, an SMS to a farmer saying, hey, a storm's coming, you better harvest your field now. So there's these cross-industry themes which you try to bring together, and in the interest of time, and I need to focus on energy. Okay, so we have different themes. Energy is one, and energy is an important one, and our use case is called selber. For all the German-speaking guys under you, selber is the German word for do-it-yourself. So what is it? It's a clean energy at scale project, so we want to scale out renewable energies as quickly as possible. It does that not by a central body that makes a big plan and finances sort of from top down, but it turns it around and says this is a prosumer-centric, bottom-up energy case. So we start optimizing the whole network by looking at one prosumer, let's say a house with a solar panel and a battery and a couple of devices using energy, and that's where we employ these technologies. So before you start talking about innovation, you need to kind of have a mindset, how is energy developing? And this is not an energy speech, and we don't have so much time, so I sort of boiled it down to 4 main waves. I'm personally very, very convinced that the world in 30 years will be powered by distributed renewable energy sources. The main reason is these 4 waves. We've gone through the first, where we saw what happens if a technology such as photovoltaics all of a sudden get large orders, like from the German taxpayers, that then are translated into economies of scale by the Chinese producers to bring down costs by a factor of 10 in about 10 years. So we've seen these panels are getting much, much cheaper, very, very fast. Production volumes go up, and in fact today you can say the cheapest form of producing energy is by photovoltaics. Specifically large-scale photovoltaic plants somewhere in the Andes, with the air thin and the temperature low. That's where you create the records at the moment for renewable energy's cheapest. This is a wave that's been going on for a while. We haven't hit bottom yet, but we're sort of far advanced. There's a second wave going on right now, and that's the battery wave. When I was in politics here, everybody told me, okay, photovoltaics, we see, things develop maybe, but batteries, they're always going to be so expensive, so what are you going to do with batteries? Well, we just wait a little bit. Batteries are becoming extremely, very, very quickly more cheap. You have the same learning curves as with the photovoltaic panels that you can monitor right now. Bloomberg New Energy Finance is a good source. Or you see they're getting cheaper and cheaper. And this combination already of photovoltaic panel and battery is a very, very strong combination. So in Switzerland, maybe 60% of your electricity needs you can cover by having photovoltaic panels and a battery. And there's a third wave not many people talk about yet, but it is going to come, and that's the integration wave. At the moment, if you think about photovoltaic power, you have a house and then you think, hey, let's buy some solar panels and put them on top. In the future, of course, that does not make sense, because you already have something on top of your house. It's called your roof. And instead of having a roof and then another panel on top, you can basically think of a roof with integrated photovoltaic production. The same thing you can think in facade elements. There's even projects on windows and roads, right? So you can integrate photovoltaic power in very many places. I have a bag with a solar panel. That gives me a bit of spare power when I need to put my laptop or mobile phone. That's the integration one that's coming, and that means everybody's going to be a prosumer producing energy even if they don't want, because they may live in a house that has a photovoltaically active roof. So that's kind of the 4 waves in energy. Now we look at the specific project here in Switzerland, not on the drawing board, but fully operational with people living in there. It's about 40 minutes travel from here in a place called Brütten. And it was realized in August 2016 by a colleague of mine, Walter Schmid. This is a sort of liberal, politically liberal, right-wing type of person, very nice though. And, and he's built many houses. And with his son, he built this house. And this is a world record, because it's a 7-family house. You see it, it's sort of modern. And it is completely covered with photovoltaic panels. So that's where the facades are already photovoltaically active, and all of the roof is one big solar panel. But it goes much further. It actually produces so much photovoltaic energy in summer that it can take that energy and make hydrogen in its cellar, store that hydrogen until winter, and then burn that hydrogen in winter, producing heat and electricity until the sun shines again more often in Switzerland. So this is a world record because, and I was there at the opening, our energy minister actually cut the power line from this house to the network, because this is a modern 7-family apartment house in Switzerland, not the Sahara or the Andes, that can be completely independent from the power grid. It's grid defected, as you call it. So you kind of have this technology today already, and it's cool and it works. There's an elevator in this building, by the way. This is a modern building. Now, to have these kind of island solutions, like every one of you and me and so on, we build those autark houses, is, however, not the right economic and ecological solution. It would be, what Dirk before said, a wasteful use of resources. Because as you and I don't have the same demand patterns, if we have exactly the same house, we can benefit by sharing. Your wife or girlfriend may use the hairblower and mine doesn't, right? So we have this type of difference in demand, and therefore, when we link our infrastructure and start sharing, we actually achieve a better quality ratio of our power consumption in a community. So we foresee Selber as a software type of tool with a hardware component that allows people to basically start joining up and start leveraging these advantages of joining up. We don't think people are going to log into their computer every day when they come home to see what's going on their energy front, because energy is a very small part of your overall costs. So this is very automated. Here is an example where we want the machines to make the decisions for 99% of the time. But for example, if you go on holiday in the next morning, and you want your electric car to be fully charged, and not just charged to the level that you need on an average day, then you could have a slider and saying, hey, I override the system today, I'm making the decision. My car needs to go full in the morning, even that costs me or my system a little bit more in energy costs. You get the picture. How does the system start to work? So we have a house with IoT devices. These are measured, they're administered in a distributed way. We run predictive analyses. These predictive analyses can sort of give us learning and scheduling stuff that is sent back to the IoT devices to run these different households in a more efficient way. And you think about this as a system optimization problem. We optimize for this guy, and we optimize for this guy together, and then basically try to reach the optimal for the community. Now, an interesting thing in this, and when we think about information and ownership and privacy, is if we look at this from the smart meter device type of view. Today, you've heard the tendency is to install smart meters in many houses. And the average business model of a smart meter is that the smart meter is bought by the utility, your power company, and then installed in your house so that the utility can suck the data it needs to run the network top-down with your data, because it's your house and your power consumption, or your power production, or your power storage, if you have a battery. Now, in our view, this is an old model. This caters to a top-down world. This is not how you fairly share the data that is your data, and that could be very valuable with the community. So we see that from a smart meter today, that is a B2B thing, we are transitioning into a prosumer smart meter, that is a B2C thing. So Selber works with the Fraunhofer Institute to develop a hardware which is actually a prosumer-centric smart meter. If you invest 20,000 in a photovoltaic system, another 10,000 in a battery in your house, we think you'll spend another $100 in getting a device that assures that whatever data leaves your house, whatever power leaves your house, is under your control. You may still assign that to a utility that runs your house in a centralized way, but you may also join a decentralized community where the whole optimization is not done top-down, but actually bottom-up in a community way. And that's really what we're modeling. This is our office in Zurich, kilometer away at the Hauptbahnhof, where we have these power block batteries. We simulate with the bike, the car charging. We have different consumption devices like the fan or the shredder. And we play around with this. This was on Ethereum, trying to make these things work together. And it doesn't really work yet, if you want to know. We're still at the very beginning. The system view of this is that you have these prosumer smart meters connected by different prosumer households, businesses, and households, private individuals. Through these devices, you have different connections, so to the heat pump, who may be an IoT-enabled device, or to your car charging station at home, which may also be IoT-enabled. You basically share this data in a marketplace. On that marketplace, you can grab data off and use smart contracts and then the AI side of things to basically run this system that you access through a web app that we as a service provider would give you. We have heavy discussions on the business model fronts with different people. ETH is involved, different utilities are involved, a bank is involved, and we're thinking about the right business model here, so we're not at the end yet. But what we see clearly is that we develop interesting stuff. And one reason why we can do that is because we already have a real-world pilot working. This is a project called Quartierstrom I initiated about a year and a half ago with the Federal Ministry of Energy. And it's the first energy blockchain lighthouse research project supported by the Swiss government, about 800,000 Swiss francs. And this is a village, and that's where we have 32, I think, households where we start sharing energy information on a blockchain where over a blockchain type system you have a management of this network bottom up and the setting of the prices, the finding of the prices. And already now we see that at the beginning I mentioned there's this link between regulation and innovation, and that's where it comes in. Because if we want to make these bottom-up systems profitable, if you want to make them fair and see them spread fast, we have to think a lot about network tariffs. So we see, for example, that this type of scenario where we manage an energy community bottom up works well if actually it's a fair economic system. If you exchange power only across the road with your neighbor over a small network, you use less infrastructure and therefore you should pay less than if you get your power all the way through the network, different transformer stations and large kilometers and kilometers of power lines. So they need to be different network tariffs depending on where you are, how much network you use, and the time of the day, because the energy markets fluctuate. So we see there's a direct influence there on the regulatory systems. And as I said before, there are some real challenges that we're facing. So we have done a pilot on IOTA. IOTA is a DAG, a directed acyclic graph, distributed ledger, not a blockchain, that's supposed to be fast for IoT devices. We managed to get 24 transactions booked in 24 hours. We should get a few thousand, because the more fine-grained we can measure this network, the better we basically can manage the overall system. So if we know exactly when you turn on your hair blower or when your wife comes home to charge your electric car, the more fine-grained we have this information, the more fine-grained we can run this network, and at the moment we're not there yet for technical means. If you use Ethereum, you'll find that the transaction costs that you have for each of those transactions are so high that overall the business case isn't there either. So you have to find smart ways to improve on these things, but we see clearly there is a market for this in the developed world, where the utilities may take a different role, and particularly also in the developing world, where you're starting to electrify entire countries, but instead of doing this with island solutions, you hook them up from the very beginning and you grow networks, microgrids, bottom up. Each hub you try to connect so that these same sharing advantages come to fruition. And that brings me to the conclusion. I have 2 more minutes, Stefan. Okay? Good. 2 more. That brings me to the conclusion on the energy side. So I've got a bit of energy experience because I've negotiated energy legislation in Parliament, and I understand very well that different things come together. So we have great energy innovation, positive. We have digital innovation of this fourth industrialized revolution we were talking about that enables and empowers this energy innovation like cheaper batteries even more. But we also have to account for climate regulation, which in this case means we can actually count on parliaments being quite favorable to new legislation because we can say, we're addressing climate, we need more renewables, so give us the right legislation that we need. And of course, at the end of the day, as we shown in the network tariff example, we also need the right regulation to make the economic case work. And therefore, there's this combination of regulation and innovation on the technical side. And in fact, I skipped this one because Dirk has spoken a lot about that. And I'd like to conclude by thanking you for your attention by also saying, please don't look at this just as a technology thing. Like, it's cool, let's hack around a little bit. I'm really convinced that the approach that you have chosen to say there's technology and there's sustainability and we need to make the two work together, that's a really, really important angle. So I'd like to thank you for choosing this angle, for being there, to listening to me and the others, and also encourage you to now work on these issues and not just like an intellectual exercise, but actually think that you have the power and it's the time that we need that power to actually make things work and get projects implemented on the ground. These solutions are needed. We need this action now, 30 years to net zero. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mick, for this very energetic talk.